Hello, welcome to Comic Tropes. I'm your host, Chris. If you've ever looked for funny, out-of-context comic book images, there's a great chance you've come across some of the covers to Superman comics in the 50s. A lot of those would showcase Superman just acting like an epic jerk, doing something horrible and very much out of character. And then, of course, you read the story and you find out, oh, Superman was secretly acting altruistically, or there's a shape-shifting alien taking Superman's place. It doesn't matter. The point is, Superman isn't actually a jerk. However, if we go back to the late 30s when Superman was new, Superman very much was a jerk. In those early issues by his creators, Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel, had to take a minute to think about that, but I got it. His creators presented Superman definitely as a force for social justice. He definitely cared about the issues of the time, but he was like some sort of cockeyed, loose cannon weapon. I mean, he would just go off and act like a jerk. There's no other way to describe it. I want to take a look at 3 stories within that first year by his original creators in which he tackles some legit issues that society was facing at the time. We've got slums in cities, we've got the risky stock market, and these newfangled automobiles. Without any further ado, let's dive into it. In Action Comics number 8, Clark Kent, aka Superman, is in court as a reporter. He's watching a judge sentencing a criminal who robbed someone. The mother pleads with the judge for leniency, saying, "He's only like all the other boys in the neighborhood, hard, resentful, underprivileged. He's my only son, sir. He might have been a good boy except for his environment. He still might be, if you're merciful." As Clark watches, the guy next to him seems to be eating snacks from a bag. "Yeah, I like peanuts for the common crook trials, but when there's a homicide, that's when I break out the popcorn." The judge instead gives the robber 2 years in prison. The criminal had 4 young friends who head over to a guy named Gimpy who had assigned the robbery. They're mad at him, but he gives each of them an easy house to rob. However, as soon as they're gone, he turns on them and warns the police. Clark has changed into his Superman suit and eavesdropped, so he beats up Gimpy. Gimpy begs him to stop, saying he'll give Superman whatever he wants. Superman replies, "Thanks. What I want right now is another poke at you." And he throws him through his fine china and dumps him in a barrel of tar. What do you suppose was going through Gimpy's mind when he laid out his new house? You know, he's thinking, yeah, I could see over there the fine family china, some heirlooms on that mantelpiece, and right there in the middle of the living room, my open bucket of tar. Superman decides to rescue the boys before the police arrest them. When he gets to the last boy, Gimpy shows up to shoot him dead, but Superman outraces the bullet and throws Gimpy across the city. Check out this panel where it looks like Gimpy's head has been twisted around 180 degrees. Superman then grabs all 4 boys and starts jumping up and down on telephone pole wires to scare the boys straight. He even threatens them, saying, "Do you ever wonder, boys, how it would feel to fall from a great distance and be crushed to a pulp?" Superman, friend to children everywhere. The boys promise to be good, and Superman muses to himself how it's not entirely their fault. "It's these slums, your poor living conditions. If there was only some way I could remedy it." Conveniently, Superman then reads the newspaper and learns that a Florida city was just demolished by a cyclone, so the government is coming in to rebuild people's homes. Superman decides that it's the crappy tenements that's the real cause of crime and decides to destroy Metropolis's slums. "Thanks for coming, Superman. The knife killer is on the loose again." "Have no fear, Police Commissioner. I'll go destroy every cutlery store in the city." Wait, what? Sure enough, Superman lays waste to the slums. He seems to be having fun. He also seems to have put on his tights inside out because I don't see the S-shield in this panel. Superman destroys buildings left and right, so the National Guard gets called in to stop him. That makes Superman flee, muttering to himself that they're just doing their job, so he'll try not to lose his temper on them. Some bombers then fly in and drop their payload, during which time Superman escapes and the slums are completely leveled. And sure enough, in the next panel, we're told that 2 weeks later, some high-end affordable homes were built. And sure, Superman could have donated his time, his speed, his super strength to build homes, kind of like Habitat for Humanity will say. He could have built them really nice homes, but why bother when Uncle Sam can foot the bill, right? I also have to wonder, did every poor person get out of their building before the bombers started leveling the place? I guess we'll never know. But it's time to move on to the next story. And you have to consider, this was 1939. This is issue 11 of Action Comics. And in 1939, it was only about, 10 years after the stock market crash. People were still dealing with the fallout from the Depression, and there was a lot of mistrust for the stock market in general. Enter Superman. In issue 11 of Action Comics, Clark Kent enters the police precinct to tell the sergeant that his phone is ringing. The sergeant explains to the reporters that it isn't that interesting. Just a, quote, routine suicide. What kind of nightmarish world is this where suicide is considered completely routine? Fortunately, Clark thinks to himself, no suicide is routine, I'd better investigate. Clark visits the deceased man and is apparently just allowed to play with the dead body because police didn't care about forensic evidence too much in the 30s. Before we could examine DNA, I guess police would just look at a dead body and be like, gross, get that out of here. So that's really not the fault of this comic book writer, because some things just don't age well. That was the time. It just seems weird to us now. But it's just because some things don't age well. Take this panel from X-Men number 35 in 1967, for example. Spider-Man had just been in a fight with the X-Men and fell in a nearby pond. He then says to the X-Men, "One cataclysmic climax coming up," in which a slightly soggy Spider-Man creams 4 X-Men. Now, at the time that was written, it was not meant to imply that Spider-Man was about to come all over the X-Men. Some things just don't age well with time. So Clark is allowed to examine the dead body, and he finds that the corpse is holding shares of stock in black gold oil. And his fellow reporter says that that stock is worthless, so the man killed himself. Now Clark decides to investigate further as Homer Ramsey. For the record, his identities apparently go like this: suit and glasses, Clark Kent; tights and no glasses, Superman; suit and no glasses, Homer Ramsey. Did I miss a story where Superman put lead in Metropolis's drinking water? As Homer Ramsey, he goes around town buying everyone's stock in black gold oil. He then goes to the oil derricks, which the owners aren't even trying to operate. They simply created the company to bilk investors. But with Superman's strength, he gets the oil derrick working, making black gold oil worth several $million. Now keep in mind, Superman at this point owns almost all the shares of black gold oil, and he's essentially a millionaire. He's bought off these shares, paying more than the investors originally bought, so nobody has been ripped off. And as the majority shareholder, he could easily vote the original owners out and start donating these millions of dollars to charity. Is he going to do that? Instead, he dresses up as Homer Ramsey and jumps into the moving car of one of the owners and offers to sell his shares for $1 million. When the owner is stunned that someone has appeared in his moving car, Homer Ramsey waves it off, telling him, "Never mind that." The owners know that they can make many millions, so they buy the stock back for $1 million. Then Homer Ramsey puts on his Superman suit, fetches the owners, and carries them to the oil derrick, where he destroys it all. But he's not done yet. There were workers employed at the site who come running at the commotion. Does Superman have pity on them? No. He lights some dynamite and threatens them to stay back unless they want to be burned to a crisp. He then torches the oil and thinks to himself, "Their faces. It was worth it just to see the expression on those scoundrels' faces when they saw their crooked scheme go up in smoke." I think that usually if you were to compare Superman and Batman, most people would say, oh, Batman is the more ruthless. But all he does is beat the hell out of his enemies and put them in jail, or sometimes even a mental hospital. Superman is torturing his enemies mentally, and he seems to have very little concern for the bystanders that just get in his way. We're going to do one more story from issue 12, and I'm going to keep this one a little short because you see where this is going. But it deals with automobiles. And you have to consider this story is set in 1939, and it really wasn't until about 1913 that automobiles began being mass-produced when Henry Ford invented the moving assembly line. So we're about 20 years past that, and now cars are mass-produced and the average person can obtain one. Because at this point in time, Henry Ford was making sure that, his workers on that assembly line could afford one of his cars with only 4 months' salary. So it was affordable, a lot more people started having them, and especially in the city, this started to become a new problem. The story begins as Clark Kent learns that a friend of his was killed by a reckless driver. So I ask you, does Superman, A, work with the police to encourage stricter enforcement of driving laws? B, use his celebrity status to tell citizens to drive more carefully? C, literally declare war on cars themselves? Of course, it's option C. Superman first shoves his way into the radio station and facepalms the announcer to tell everyone that homicidal drivers will now answer to him, and he is declaring war on cars. He then needlessly smashes through the building's wall and heads to the impound lot. There he smashes all the cars and comments to himself how he's going to enjoy this private little war. Superman next visits a used car business and tells the salesman that he's sure this will be tough on his pocketbook, but he's about to save a lot of lives, and then destroys all of the cars that are for sale. Finally, Superman heads to Metropolis's auto plant and destroys it while employees run screaming for their lives. But Superman isn't done ruining people's day and costing them money. He smashes back into the radio station that was just repaired to declare that he was serious earlier. He then runs around town until he sees a police officer pull over a speeder. The cop is about to take a bribe, but when he sees Superman, he punches the driver in the face instead. Superman approves. The story ends with Clark Kent's boss ordering him to cover a story at the mayor's office where the mayor is enacting new traffic regulations. Clark Kent leaves only to find that he's getting a ticket because he parked in the wrong spot. Now I think if Superman had seen somebody doing that, parking in the wrong spot, he would have wrapped the car around the man and thrown him across the city. Instead, in the comic, he thinks to himself, "Hooray, it worked." A lot of times when a property becomes popular and it starts getting adapted into other media, it can get tamed down. And I think that did happen with Superman. As soon as he started getting toys and his radio show, he got tamed down. But I think in the case of Superman, instead of becoming bland, he became more likable. So it was a good thing that this happened. It's just strange to look back and see how Siegel and Shuster made Superman a bit of an epic asshole in that first year of comics. But they were trying to address society's real problems in an over-the-top way. I think some of this was intended to be satire to an extent. It just has aged a bit strangely. But anyway, I think overall Superman became more likable as he became adapted into things like comic strips in the newspapers, serials at the movie theaters, his TV show, etc. He became a little bit more tamed down, but I think it worked for the character. I don't think that a character that was this much of a jerk would have necessarily lasted as long. Anyway, that was the episode. Thank you very much for watching, and of course, my whole thing where I say keep reading comics, but I've got a little bit of housekeeping, some notes for myself. So, if you're watching this months from now, you can probably skip this part. But if it's still, the first half of 2018, this is valid. I'm going to Japan in a couple months, and I plan on doing some episodes there. I'm probably going to pick up some small things that will be giveaways for my viewers. Still thinking of how exactly I'm going to approach that, but I'll try to do something fun for that, so keep that in mind. I'll do episodes actually both in Japan and Hong Kong. That's my current plan. I could use some help offsetting the costs of this show. Not necessarily that trip, it just got me thinking of this. Please consider joining Patreon to support my show, even if it's only a couple bucks a month. it would make a big difference to me. I could definitely use the help affording, just the comics that are reviewed. I'd love someday to get a higher resolution camera and a better laptop that I can edit this stuff on. That's stuff that I need, but it can wait, but I would love to be able to invest in this show. So, and if you can't afford to support the Patreon, I understand, but maybe consider sharing one of the videos that you've liked on social media or telling somebody new about it, because the more subscribers I get, the better I do there. Also, there is currently a Kickstarter for a comic book. It's very important to me on a personal level. I did make a separate video, but you may not have watched that because it wasn't a Comic Tropes episode. I had a friend, Jeremy, who passed away almost 4 years ago. I have a hard time talking about it. It was unexpected. It was sudden. He was doing a fantastic fantasy comic at the time called Skyward. There were 9 issues, and it ended on a cliffhanger when he passed away. His widow, Kelly, is putting on a Kickstarter to create an omnibus of those issues, plus a 10th issue that Jeremy had written or at least left notes on, and she got some really top-tier talent in the industry to help write and illustrate and color it and letter it. So she's putting that out as an omnibus, and I really think it was a fantastic comic. I think you'd really like it if you like fantasy or just good, fun comics. He was a great artist, a great person. And I actually will be contributing a pinup to it. So if you're a fan of fantasy, good comics, or somehow my artwork, please consider supporting this Kickstarter. It would mean a lot to me. I'm sure it's going to get funded, but I'm telling you because I think it's a great book, and I'd really love more people to know about my late friend Jeremy and his great work. I'd like that to live on. He did a lot of stuff that you may have seen and not even known. He worked with the NFL on a comic. He did all of the 25th anniversary G.I. Joe comics with writer Larry Hama. So he did a bunch of stuff in the industry in the short time he was around. He died pretty young, and that's all I can really say about it without just making myself a mess. All right, thank you very much for letting me talk about that housekeeping stuff. I don't think I have anything else to comment on, but I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you commenting. It's great. I have some wonderful, wonderful viewers. I love talking with all of you guys whenever I do live streaming art, do a Q&A chat thing. That's awesome. I always have a fantastic time talking with all of you, or just responding to the comments and the emails and stuff like that. So, all my best to you. Until next time, keep reading comics.